This month in Meteor, last month in Meteor, I wasn't here because I was having a baby child. She is now 8 weeks old and I haven't slept. So if I ramble, someone needs to throw things at me. If anyone would like a sticker celebrating the birth of my child, contact me after the talk. It's very small from this distance, but it's totally legit. Back to Meteor. Where do we get the news from? You don't need to come to this to learn the news, but it is more convivial having you all here. But if you would prefer to just sit at home and read forums, then forums.meteor.com is a very good source of news in what is happening. The Meteor blog is a reasonable source of news. Meteor Weekly is a well-curated source. I would recommend checking that out. And Transmission, if you like it a bit more visual. But the ultimate arbiter of Meteor news is still history.md. Just check it out. It's really good. I'm getting pretty good at picking out what they're going to put in blog posts because you can usually tell the noise from the interesting stuff. And also news, like just tell us what you're building. We are a community. So, previously on Meteor. I think you all heard this last month because version 1.3.2 was out then, but it is all the exciting changes. So I included it because the changes I'm going to talk about that are new are less interesting. So very exciting is now like proper CommonJS support, proper module import support. That includes stuff that if you've been using Browserify or Webpack in other projects, you'll already be used to, like being able to import modules directly on the client side, which is massively useful. But also like more advanced things like importing assets for like style sheets in your JavaScripts. And I think we're going to have a talk on that next month. And then also the more advanced features coming down the pipeline, async await. So one interesting thing with async await is historically, Meteor's had this weird nugget that is fibers. In order to make asynchronous code read like synchronous code, they relied on a native module called fibers, and historically no one's been able to explain reasonably well what it does. But essentially what it does is it enables coroutines, which means that you can just pause a thread. You can pause the current thread midway through a function, which is very much like what generators does. And then if you just look at generators from another angle, then they become the async await terminology that is in the next ECMAScript spec. And it means that they're going to start, Meteor's already started rewriting the framework to not require the fibers native add-on, which is dull, unless you're me, in which case I think it's really good because it's one more thing that reduces the distance between building Meteor apps and just building any old Node JavaScript app. So then what happened? Well, version 1.3.3 was released, including radical Node has been upgraded from 0.1043 to 0.1045, which is kind of getting awkward because Node is now on 6.0. But of course, all of these numbers are using the romantic versioning scheme. They don't mean anything. They're all just there because developers just feel like it's an important release and they change the numbers. As you can see, this is a point release. But more excitingly, things like DDP batching. So Meteor's client side communicates to the server side using DDP, which is basically JSON over the wire. And historically, it's been pretty efficient because you're communicating the database changes between client and server. This is nice and fast, and all handled for you by the framework. So one extra optimization that they've added is that there's now a configurable time delay on the client. When it wants to send changes to the server, it will batch them up every kind of 500 milliseconds or minimum of 5 milliseconds, configurable to your heart's desire, but it just optimizes the communication. Yes, sir?
I was just going to say the best thing is in reverse, so that you don't have a situation where you keep getting
thousands of tiny payloads.
Like a tiny payload, and then you screen refreshes, and you get a tiny payload and screen refreshes,
yeah.
And you get 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
You basically get 1,000 and then you screen refresh.
Like in the situation maybe where you had a table with 10,000 rows,
That being one
and
example.
in previous to 1.3.3, you would get a single DDP message for every single table row, depending on the structure of your data. Now you would get a whole batch, which is much faster. Meteor now supports Babel RC style configuration of the magic and voodoo that is your Babel transforms. This is interesting if you dislike any of the transforms that Meteor applies by default, but not enough to say remove Meteor packages. You can just tweak your Babel RC, and you can then, your Babel RC tweaks are applied before the Meteor defaults, so you can start to override what Babel is up to under the hood. Flexible import usage is now possible in 1.3.3, which I think is curious, but the whole idea behind the new ECMAScript imports was that they were very statically parsable, so that enterprise developers could run Eclipse and know every single thing that their app was going to do before they ran it. And now, but because imports are still being compiled down to requires by Babel, you still have the option of using them in a kind of functional way. So what this really means is, in the spec, all your imports should come at the start of the file, and they should not be dynamic. You can't dynamically resolve what other module you want to import. But what Meteor's allowing is some flexibility around that, including being able to nest imports inside conditions. How that plays out is anyone's guess. Then there was 1.3.3.1, which was the dullest release to date, but did much good work in terms of fixing bugs and updating the versions of dependencies. Then there was version 1.3.4, in which, in a minor release, NPM was updated from 2.15.1 to 3.9.6. Again, perhaps very boring, unless you care about semantic versioning, in which case that is a complete outrage. But it was done so that Windows users could continue to use the Meteor tool with the ever-lengthening path name saga and the unwillingness of Microsoft to ever allow paths deeper than 256 characters, and Meteor's sudden, very positive dependence on NPM. Suddenly, Windows users couldn't use Meteor so well. You depend on a package that depends on a package that depends on a package. Transitively, very quickly, you've used up the available path length. In old NPM, that was a problem. They decided to just jump tracks, move to 3.9.6 NPM, which means that now Windows users can use Meteor again. And then, a cautionary tale, 1.3.4 also snuck in a tiny fix, adding a 30-second timeout for HTTP requests from the Meteor CLI. Innocuous, a trivial change. There is no such thing as a minor change. You're lying to yourself if you think that you understand every single piece of this system. As evidenced by the very quickly released Meteor 1.3.4.1, which then increased the HTTP timeout for the Meteor CLI to 60 seconds, which then allowed anyone using Galaxy to actually continue to deploy to Galaxy, which is a good hosting service and you should use it. So obviously, Meteor was very keen to make that work again. So there is a message there. Always test with real users. That's the kind of thing that you might not pick up if, say, all your hosting is managed by a DevOps team, and then suddenly you throw it out to the real world and they try and deploy, and 30-second timeout isn't enough to get all my bits up to my server. Anywho, there's another new thing. Not only is there history, there's roadmap. There's another document in the Meteor GitHub repository, which now outlines the next priorities on the list. And that includes support for the new 3.2 MongoDB driver and above. You can use MongoDB 3.2 with Meteor right now, but there are some bugs. We are using it at Tableflip, and we haven't run into them, but it's worth noting that soon that problem will go away because it's high on the list of things to fix. Node 4.4, it's about time that Meteor got on the stable release of Node again, and that is also next on the list. So I think that's all coming up in Meteor 1.4, which you can test today, I believe, using your Meteor show command will show you what release trains are available. Meteor is deeply in love with NPM these days and expect further NPM integration. Also, the new Meteor test mode is very good, but there's some rough edges around using it for continuous integration. All of this is due to be fixed in Meteor 1.4. Also coming up, strong documentation, a nice public stance from Meteor on project governance and you. Meteor's always been open to contributions from the wider community, but they're finally getting around to defining how that works and how you go from kind of here's my tiny bug report through to here's my sort of suggestion for an improvement in the documentation through to full-blown you have commit access to the Meteor repo. That process will now be paved. They have said quite clearly the view layer for Meteor, a contentious question, Meteor's view layer will continue to support Blaze, But the view layer is going to be React, Angular, or Blaze in that order. So most of the guide, the new guide.meteor.com, focuses on React. There's still some Blaze on it. Obviously Angular as well, but it sort of feels like React is their first port of call. Angular is very much going to be a first-class citizen and supported. And then Blaze, they're going to make sure it works, but they're also interested in community offerings if anyone wants to keep going and adding new features. But as far as Meteor is concerned, from what I can read, it works, it does everything it needs to. It's going to sit there and just remain compatible with Meteor, but they're going to rely more on React and Angular as the view layer going forwards. Then the final thing, other data sources. So Meteor is hardwired around Mongo. There are some really interesting community packages that let you use Postgres and other data sources. But the plan for other data sources and Meteor in the future is the Apollo stack, which I think we touched on very briefly last month. There are some resources around it, but I'm not going to talk about it for very long because this is the guts of what Richard is going to talk about because he has had a play with it. The community. There's still the European Meteor Unconference on the 15th of July. I don't know if we've still got discount codes, but if you want to unconference the heck out of Meteor, and you want to go to Berlin because, you know, just go and kiss the EU and say goodbye and cry. Just hug it and just tell them all that we tried. And you can do that in the kind of comfy confines of a tech conference, so you don't feel too awkward. Package of the month, very quickly. This is my favorite package ever because it's like Denius. That's a great name. If Emily still needed a name, my baby girl, I would call her Denius. I think that's really solid. Debug DDP is the simplest package I've seen in all of Atmosphere, and all it does is it prints out what DDP traffic is occurring to your browser console, and it's like 5 lines of code. It's not been updated in a year. Totally works. I love it. It's my favorite. And now that your browser console is quite a fully featured console filtering machine, it's very convenient. Just like having the JSON dumped out to the console, you can filter it in the console. Console. Check it out. If you're trying to debug why, say, a 1,000,000 row table is taking a long time to load, you'll quickly see why if your console sets on fire. And what's your news? Get in touch. There's so many ways you can talk to us. If you're playing with Meteor, if you're Meteor curious, come to raise an issue on GitHub. It's a familiar workflow. That is all, folks.